In the quiet English town of Hexham near Newcastle, an event unfolded that would shake the foundations of science, religion, and the human soul. On May 5, 1957, two young sisters were tragically killed in a car accident while walking to church. 18 months later, their grieving parents welcomed twin girls into the world, and what followed became one of the most chilling and well-documented cases of reincarnation ever recorded. These twins displayed knowledge they shouldn't have had, bore the same birthmarks and scars as their deceased sisters, and described in eerie detail the violent deaths they seemingly never experienced. For 2 decades, scientists from the University of Virginia studied the family-gathering evidence that defied reason and rewrote what we thought we knew about life after death. Before we dive deeper into the haunting story of the Robertson family and their impossible daughters, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear and drop a comment with your state. We love connecting with fellow seekers of the unknown. This isn't myth or folklore. This case was rigorously investigated by Dr. Ian Stevenson, one of the 20th century's most respected psychiatrists, and published in peer-reviewed medical journals. The evidence remains so disturbing it still unsettles researchers today. In 1957, Hexham was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone. Church bells set the rhythm of daily life, and tragedy rarely came knocking. The Robertson family lived modestly rooted in routine and faith. John, a Catholic convert, ran a grocery and milk delivery business. Florence, once a Salvation Army member, had embraced Catholicism when they married. Together they raised 6 children, 4 boys, and 2 cherished daughters. 11-year-old Joanna was wise beyond her years, a creative spirit, with a deep love for her younger sister. 6-year-old Jacqueline was energetic and affectionate, idolizing Joanna and following her everywhere. The 2 girls were inseparable. Jacqueline had a distinct scar on her forehead from a fall and a dark birthmark near her hip details that seemed unremarkable then, but would later gain chilling significance. Their lives revolved around their church and community. Each Sunday, the girls would walk to service in their finest clothes, giggling and skipping ahead of their parents. But beneath this idyllic life, John Robertson quietly held a controversial belief. He believed in reincarnation. Since childhood, he had prayed not just for salvation, but for proof that the soul could live on. Florence, more grounded in traditional doctrine, found this belief unsettling. It created tension between them, but neither could have imagined how prophetic John's prayers would become. That fateful Sunday morning dawned bright and calm. Joanna wore her favorite blue dress. Jacqueline chose a yellow one that made her feel grown up. They were excited to walk with their friend, Anthony Ledden, a 9-year-old neighbor. At around 10:15 a.m., the 3 children set off down their familiar route. At 10:27 a.m., Marjorie Wynne, a woman in severe mental crisis, deliberately drove her car onto the sidewalk. Days earlier, she had lost custody of her children due to her unstable behavior and drug dependency. That morning, under the influence of barbiturates and in complete psychological collapse, she targeted the children with her vehicle. The impact was instant and catastrophic. Joanna was killed on the spot. Jacqueline suffered fatal head trauma and died en route to the hospital. Anthony died hours later. The scene was nightmarish. Blood stained the pavement. Torn dresses, the blue and yellow so carefully chosen, lay soaked and ruined. The laughter that had filled the streets moments before was replaced by sirens and screams. The entire town reeled in grief. For John and Florence, the news struck like a lightning bolt. One moment, they were expecting to see their daughters at church. The next, they were being told both girls were dead. Florence collapsed. John stood frozen in disbelief. 3 days later, the entire town gathered to mourn. It was a tragedy so cruel, so senseless, it felt like the world itself had cracked open. And yet the story was far from over. It was only just beginning. Two small white coffins lay side by side, draped in flowers, while sobs echoed through every corner of the church. The Robertson family was shattered beyond recognition. In the days that followed, Florence withdrew completely, barely eating, barely speaking. Their once vibrant home now felt like a mausoleum. The girls' toys were left untouched, their beds unmade since that final Sunday, their clothes still hanging in the closet like ghosts frozen in time. While Florence mourned in silence, John turned to prayer with a desperation that unsettled her. Night after night, she found him in the girls' bedroom, whispering not for peace, but for their return. His prayers grew more intense as time passed, fixated on the idea that death wasn't the end. Florence stopped attending church altogether, unable to reconcile her faith with such a cruel loss. John, still present at services, unnerved even the priest with his unrelenting spiritual fervor. 8 months after the accident, everything changed. Florence discovered she was pregnant. What should have been a moment of healing only deepened the rift between them. Florence saw it as a gift, a chance to begin again. But John was convinced it was something more. He believed the girls were returning, not symbolically, literally. He was certain Florence would give birth to twins, and that Joanna and Jacqueline were coming home. "They're coming back to us," he whispered at night. "I can feel them." Florence was horrified. As a devout Catholic, the idea of reincarnation was heresy. She begged him to stop fearing for his soul. But John's belief only strengthened. He claimed to feel their presence, spending hours in their bedroom, talking to them, as though they'd never left. Despite multiple checkups, Dr. Margaret Thornton found only one fetus. There was no indication of twins, but John remained resolute. "There will be two," he said. "They left together. They will return together." Tension consumed the household. Florence, torn between grief and fear, confided in friends that she no longer recognized her husband. The mention of twins reduced her to tears. As her due date neared, she feared not just the pain of childbirth, but what her husband might become if only one child was born. Or worse, if he was right. Labor began early on October 4th, 1958, exactly 18 months after the accident. Florence was rushed to the hospital. Dr. Thornton expected a routine delivery. No one was prepared for what followed. At 3:47 a.m., Florence gave birth to a healthy baby girl with dark hair and piercing eyes. But minutes later, contractions resumed. At 4:12 a.m., a second daughter was born. The staff was stunned. Dr. Thornton, a seasoned physician, had never seen a twin pregnancy go undetected across multiple examinations. The limited technology of 1958 couldn't explain the oversight. But John wasn't surprised. "Of course, there are two," he said calmly. "Joanna and Jacqueline have come home." The twins Jillian and Jennifer were genetically identical, confirmed later by blood tests. But something unusual was immediately clear. Jennifer bore two distinct markings: a reddish birthmark above her right eyebrow, uncannily similar to the scar Jacqueline had from a childhood accident, and a dark round mark above her left hip, identical in location and appearance to Jacqueline's birthmark. Identical twins shouldn't have different markings. Yet Jennifer's were so specific and anomalous that Dr. Thornton documented them in detail, photographing both for hospital records. She had delivered hundreds of twins, but never encountered anything like this. When Florence first held her daughters, her emotions were a storm: awe, confusion, fear. Something beyond comprehension was unfolding, and it had only just begun. Though the birth of Jillian and Jennifer should have brought healing, an eerie undercurrent crept in from the start. Florence couldn't shake a growing unease, especially when she held Jennifer. There was something unsettling in the child's gaze, a knowing, almost ancient look no newborn should possess. John, meanwhile, watched the twins with obsessive intensity. When he examined Jennifer's markings, He didn't seem surprised. He simply smiled and whispered, "Welcome home, Jacqueline." The words sent a chill through Florence's heart. 3 weeks later, they returned to their home in Hexham. But the house they once knew would never feel the same. Their homecoming marked the beginning of a series of disturbing events that would draw the attention of researchers from around the world and force even hardened skeptics to question the boundaries of life and death. For the first year, the twins were seemingly normal. They cried, they slept, and they hit all the expected milestones. Florence began to hope that maybe John's beliefs had been nothing more than the product of grief and that their lives could slowly rebuild. But everything changed when the girls turned 18 months old, the exact span of time between the deaths of Joanna and Jacqueline and their birth. It began one cold February morning in 1960. Florence was tidying up while the twins played quietly in the living room. Just days earlier, John had retrieved a few stored items from the garden shed, including a box of old toys that had once belonged to the girls they lost. They had been packed away after the accident, completely out of sight, unreachable, unknown to the twins. Without prompting, Jillian walked straight to a particular porcelain doll with auburn hair, a blue velvet dress, and a small chip on its left hand. Joanna's doll, her favorite. Her name had been Margaret. Jillian cradled the doll exactly as Joanna used to, and murmured, "Oh, Margaret, I've missed you so much." Florence froze. How could a toddler know the doll's name, let alone show such familiarity with it? At the same moment, Jennifer had picked up Jacqueline's old stuffed rabbit. One ear was slightly worn from years of constant companionship. Jennifer pressed it to her cheek and whispered, "Bunny." It was the exact nickname only Jacqueline had ever used for the toy. Florence, trembling, called out for John. When he entered the room and saw the scene, his daughters playing with the toys of their dead sisters as if they had never left, his face went pale with a strange mix of triumph and dread. "You see," he whispered. "I told you they came back." But Florence clung to logic. Maybe the children had overheard stories. Maybe they'd seen the toys before and retained some fleeting memory. She needed to believe there was a rational explanation. Yet over the following weeks, those hopes crumbled. The twins began displaying knowledge they couldn't possibly have acquired. They spoke of things they'd never seen, places they'd never been, and people they'd never met. Their behavior mirrored Joanna and Jacqueline in unnerving ways, from mannerisms to specific preferences down to the smallest quirks. And then came the voices behind closed doors. By the spring of 1961, the twins were 2.5. One afternoon, Florence passed their bedroom and overheard them speaking, not in the simple babble of toddlers, but with the familiarity of people reminiscing. "Do you remember walking to church that Sunday?" Jillian asked. "You wore your yellow dress, the one with the buttons." Jennifer nodded. "I remember. Anthony came with us. He was telling us about the bike he wanted for his birthday." Florence's breath caught. Those details were accurate. Jacqueline had worn her yellow dress that day, and Anthony had indeed talked about a new bicycle. Jennifer's voice dropped. Then the car came. It was loud. The lady looked angry. "Do you remember how much it hurt?" Jillian answered in a whisper. "I remember the blood." There was so much blood. And the screaming. Florence burst into the room, heart pounding. "What are you girls talking about?" The twins looked up calmly, their expressions too solemn for their age. "We were just remembering," Jillian said, "before we came back. From that day forward, similar conversations became frequent. The girls spoke in private about memories that matched Joanna and Jacqueline's lives, down to schoolmates' names, bedroom layouts, and even phrases their grandmother used. But most disturbing were the times they spoke about the accident itself. Florence often found them consoling one another after nightmares, filled with screaming twisted metal and blinding headlights. And then when the girls turned 3, something even more chilling occurred. Florence was folding laundry when she overheard Jennifer say to Jillian, "When the car hit us, I couldn't breathe. My nose and mouth were full of blood." And then everything went dark. Jillian didn't flinch. She reached out and gently touched the birthmark on Jennifer's forehead. "That's where you hit your head," she said softly. "That's where the mark came from." Shaken, Florence turned to their family doctor, Margaret Thornton, to voice her growing fears. Dr. Thornton offered a clinical explanation. Children had vivid imaginations. Perhaps the twins had overheard details in adult conversations. But even she seemed unsettled. Florence knew what she was hearing wasn't pretend. The girl's words carried a depth of feeling no toddler could fake. This wasn't play. It felt like memory. The most chilling moment came during bath time. Jennifer, just 3.5 years old, pointed to the mark above her hip and said completely unprompted, "This is where I got hurt when I fell on the bucket. It never stopped hurting, even after I died." Florence stood frozen, her last threads of skepticism beginning to unravel. By then, the story of the Robertson twins had begun spreading beyond Hexham. Local newspapers ran pieces about the girls' mysterious behaviors, and word soon reached the international research community. In 1963, the case caught the attention of Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist from the University of Virginia, renowned for his methodical investigations into alleged cases of reincarnation. Though controversial in mainstream science, Stevenson had built a reputation for his careful documentation and rigorous standards. When Dr. Stevenson first met the Robertson family, the twins were 4 years old, what he considered the ideal age for such cases. He'd found that children with supposed past life memories usually recall the most vivid details between ages 3 and 6 before the memories begin to fade. He began with physical examinations, photographing, and measuring Jennifer's birthmarks, comparing them to medical records and old photographs of Jacqueline. The resemblance was staggering. The mark on Jennifer's forehead matched Jacqueline's scar in size, shape, and placement. Even more astonishing, the mark became more visible in cold weather, just as Jacqueline's scar had. Dr. Stevenson conducted extensive interviews with Florence and John, logging every statement, behavior, and moment that might indicate continuity between the deceased sisters and the twins. He found Florence's reluctance to embrace the reincarnation theory especially compelling. She had no emotional incentive to confirm the idea. In fact, she resisted it. Her testimony, Stevenson later noted, was among the most credible he had encountered, precisely because she wanted to disprove the phenomenon. During his visits, Stevenson observed the twins firsthand. He watched as they demonstrated familiarity with objects, names, and places, tied to Joanna and Jacqueline knowledge they should not and could not possess. In one striking test, he showed the twins photographs of local people, some of whom had been close to their deceased sisters. Without hesitation, the girls named several correctly, including individuals they had never met in their current lives. Their behavior went far beyond memory. The twins exhibited intense phobias, especially of cars. Even the sound of an engine made them panic. They refused to walk near busy roads and became visibly distressed when cars approached too quickly. Their fear was raw and visceral, the kind you can't fake. Their personalities only deepened the mystery. Jillian mirrored Joanna in nearly every way, nurturing, protective, grounded. Jennifer, on the other hand, was sensitive, dependent, and prone to anxiety just like Jacqueline had been. Dr. Stevenson continued studying the family for more than 2 decades, documenting the case in multiple books and papers. He would later describe it as one of the strongest pieces of evidence for reincarnation he had ever encountered. But for the Robertson family, this wasn't just a study. It was their everyday reality. As the twins grew older, the memories didn't fade, they intensified. Nightmares plagued their sleep. Florence would wake to their screams, rush to their room, and find them trembling and drenched in sweat. The dreams were always the same: bright headlights, screeching tires, impact, pain, terror. The lady in the car looked so angry Jennifer cried after one particularly harrowing dream. She wanted to hurt us because her own children were taken away. I saw it in her eyes right before. The dreams were so vivid, so consistent, that Florence began sleeping in their room. She was afraid to leave them alone in the dark. Even simple car rides became traumatic. The girls would sob, cling to each other, and whisper reassurances. They wouldn't sit near the windows. They hated the sound of traffic. And when cars drove erratically, they would panic. But perhaps most haunting were the moments when they comforted each other in ways that no child should understand. "Don't worry about the scary dreams," Jillian once told Jennifer. "I know it hurt when we died, but we're safe now. We came back together just like we promised." The psychological strain of raising children who remembered their own deaths began to take its toll. Florence found herself doubting everything: her faith, her understanding of reality, even her sanity. She wondered if she had somehow projected these things onto her daughters, if the trauma of losing 2 children had infected the new life she was trying to build. But deep down, she already knew the truth. This wasn't coincidence, and it certainly wasn't imagination. As the twins grew older, the weight of their early memories began to shift the balance within the family. Florence and John's marriage, already strained by grief, became increasingly fragile. John's unwavering belief in reincarnation clashed painfully with Florence's need for rationality. Their older sons, once comforted by the idea that their sisters had returned, now found themselves torn, awed one moment, disturbed the next, as familiar gestures and voices echoed from unfamiliar mouths. The emotional dynamics inside the Robertson home became complex and volatile. And then, as the twins neared their 5th birthday, Dr. Ian Stevenson delivered a quiet warning: the memories might begin to fade. In case after case, he had observed a common pattern: children who remembered past lives would slowly lose those memories around age 5 or 6 as their current identities took hold. He was right. By late 1963, Jillian and Jennifer's extraordinary behaviors began to diminish. They stopped talking about past lives. The spontaneous recognition of objects, the visceral fear of cars, the whispered conversations about their deaths, all gradually melted away. By the time they turned 6, the girls no longer remembered anything about being Joanna and Jacqueline. When asked, they looked confused, as if being told a strange story that didn't belong to them. Dr. Stevenson recorded the shift meticulously. The fading of memories coincided with the girls entering school, making friends, and embracing their current selves. It was as if the haunting presence of their former lives had slowly receded, like a spirit making room for someone new. Florence felt a strange, bittersweet relief. The normalcy she had longed for was finally returning, but so too was a sense of loss. The fading memories had been painful and mysterious, yes, but they had also been the last living tie to the daughters she had buried. Now even that connection was dissolving. John saw it differently. To him, the girls' forgetting wasn't a loss, it was a transition. "They came back to show us death isn't the end," he would say. And now they've moved on, just as they should. In the years that followed, Jillian and Jennifer grew into bright, successful young women. Their bond remained close, but the mystical tether that had once connected them to the past was gone. They became individuals, unique, distinct, and untethered from the shadows that had once defined their earliest years. Dr. Stevenson maintained contact with the family, tracking the twins' development well into adulthood. When he interviewed them again in their 20s, neither sister had any memory of the events that had shaped their early lives. They were polite but skeptical, treating the tales of reincarnation as interesting stories from a past they no longer recognized. But then in 1981, something strange happened. At age 23, Jillian began experiencing vivid inner visions. short, intense flashes of playing in a garden with her brothers as a young child. She described an unfamiliar house with exacting detail rows of orchard trees, a stone path, a peculiar swing near a crooked fence. The layout matched perfectly the family's old home in Wickham, a place Gillian had never visited in her current life. Her descriptions were so precise, they left Florence and Dr. Stevenson stunned, but the visions vanished after a few weeks and never returned. Despite this final flicker of mystery, the case had already become a cornerstone in Stevenson's research. Over 20 years, he had documented more than 30 direct correlations between the twins' behaviors and the lives of their deceased sisters. The case featured prominently in his academic works, including Children Who Remember Previous Lives and Reincarnation and Biology. The physical evidence remained perhaps the most compelling. Jennifer's birthmarks, confirmed by blood tests to appear on a monozygotic twin who shared identical DNA with her sister, were scientifically anomalous. Identical twins should not have such distinct physical differences. Yet her markings perfectly mirrored Jacqueline's scars in size, shape, and even behavior, darkening in cold weather, just as Jacqueline's had. Stevenson's exhaustive documentation included high-resolution photographs, medical records, first-hand interviews with both family and community members, and the direct testimony of independent witnesses. His conclusions remained cautious. While he never claimed to have proven reincarnation, he did state clearly that traditional scientific explanations could not account for all that had been observed. The case drew both praise and criticism. Skeptics argued that John's beliefs might have influenced the twins through subtle suggestion, or that the behaviors were the result of coincidence, selective memory, or parental projection. But those who supported the research pointed to a number of inconvenient truths. Florence's deep skepticism, the twins' knowledge of private events they were never exposed to, the physical anomalies, and the authenticity of the twins' emotional responses, none of it could be easily dismissed. Stevenson's work on the Robertson twins continues to stir debate to this day. Researchers, philosophers, and psychologists still argue over its meaning. What makes the case so powerful is not any single piece of evidence, but the overwhelming pattern of connections. A birthmark might be a coincidence. A child's imagination might conjure a name. But when dozens of these moments converge across time, behavior, memory, and body, it becomes much harder to explain away. How could children describe a past life they never lived? How could scars appear on a body genetically identical to one that shouldn't have them? How could two young girls barely old enough to speak remember in aching detail the moment they died? The Robertson case forces us to ask the unanswerable. Is memory more than neurons firing in the brain? Does consciousness end with the body, or is there something else, something that survives, something that waits, and perhaps sometimes, something that returns? For the Robertsons, those questions were not theoretical. They were lived, breathed, and wept over. They were carried in lullabies and nightmares, in bath-time whispers and blood-stained memories. In one quiet house in Hexham, the boundary between life and death wasn't just blurred, it was shattered. And in that fracture, the impossible became real. The Robertson family lived through something that shook the foundations of their understanding of life and death. Whether we interpret their story as proof of reincarnation, a chain of uncanny coincidences, or something science has yet to explain, it remains one of the most thoroughly documented and perplexing cases in the annals of unexplained phenomena. Florence Robertson, who passed away in 1979, never fully reconciled what she had seen. In her final interviews, she admitted she still struggled with the spiritual implications of reincarnation. But she couldn't deny what she had witnessed. "I saw it with my own eyes," she once said. You can doubt what others tell you, but how do you doubt your own child? John Robertson died in 1985, still convinced beyond question that his daughters had returned. To him, their early memories were a divine gift, a sign that death was not an end, but a passage, and that love could reach across even the final boundary. Today, Gillian and Jennifer Robertson live quiet, ordinary lives. They have families of their own, careers, and no conscious memory of their early childhood experiences, the years when they spoke of things no one could explain. But their story continues to reverberate through scientific and spiritual communities alike. Dr. Ian Stevenson's work on their case remains one of the most detailed studies in reincarnation research. His archive includes over 30 direct correlations between the twins' memories and their deceased sisters' lives' behavioral patterns. Statements, knowledge of events, objects, relationships, and above all, physical evidence. The Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia, which Dr. Stevenson founded, continues to investigate similar cases around the world. But none have matched the depth and breadth of the Robertson case. Then, in 1978, just before the twins turned 21, Dr. Stevenson uncovered something that deepened the mystery and made the case more disturbing than anyone imagined. He commissioned a comprehensive genetic analysis to confirm what had long been assumed, that Gillian and Jennifer were monozygotic twins, originating from a single fertilized egg, and thus sharing identical DNA. The results confirmed it. They were genetically identical. This made Jennifer's unique birthmarks, which matched Jacqueline's old wounds, scientifically impossible by conventional standards. Identical twins aren't supposed to carry different physical features, but Jennifer did, and it wasn't an isolated anomaly. Through a broader analysis of over 1,600 cases, Dr. Stevenson found that in approximately 35% of reported reincarnation claims, children bore birthmarks or physical deformities that mirrored injuries, wounds, or scars from the person they allegedly were before. These weren't vague discolorations. They were often anatomically specific, medically verifiable, and matched the location and nature of fatal wounds recorded in historical or hospital documents. If the phenomenon was real, its implications were staggering. It meant consciousness, or something like it, might persist beyond death. It meant identity might survive. And it meant that memory trauma, and even the physical remnants of injury, might pass from one life to another. But there was more. As Dr. Stevenson interviewed residents of Hexham, he uncovered a pattern of collective silence and suppressed fear. Dozens of locals admitted to having witnessed the twins exhibit uncanny knowledge and behaviors. But most had stayed quiet. Some had feared ridicule. Others had simply been unnerved. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, the twins' former nursery teacher, finally came forward years later. She confessed that when Jennifer was 3, she had drawn chillingly accurate pictures of the fatal car crash, depicting the vehicle, the location, and even the driver's enraged expression. "I burned the drawings," Mrs. Hartwell said. "They were made by someone who had seen it, not just imagined it. I couldn't bring myself to show the family." The local postman, William Davies, reported that during his rounds he'd occasionally overheard the girls talking about people who had died before they were born. People they described with intimate familiarity, mentioning personal details they should have no way of knowing. What Dr. Stevenson uncovered wasn't just an individual case. It was a haunting ripple that touched an entire town. The silence that wrapped around the story wasn't skepticism, it was dread. And at the center of it was a family struggling under a weight no one else could see. Florence's health deteriorated rapidly in the twins' early years. She suffered from insomnia, panic attacks, and bouts of deep depression. She was medicated for stress, but rarely spoke about the true source of her anguish. "How do you tell your doctor," she once asked Dr. Stevenson, "that your children remember being murdered? How do you live with the feeling that the daughters you buried are looking at you through the eyes of the daughters you're raising?" The twins' older brothers bore their own silent burdens. They loved Joanna and Jacqueline, and while part of them found comfort in Gillian and Jennifer's early resemblance, another part never quite felt at ease. It was as if they were seeing shadows of the past flicker behind faces that didn't quite belong to it. The Robertson case endures because it forces a confrontation with questions most people avoid. What is consciousness? Can it survive death? Are our bodies truly the limit of who we are, or merely temporary vessels for something more enduring? The twin story is not proof. It is a mirror. One that shows us the limits of what we believe and dares us to look beyond. And in that mirror, we may just glimpse something extraordinary, something terrifying, something real. Joanna and Jacqueline had been deeply loved. For their brothers, seeing flickers of their sisters in the twins brought a disorienting blend of comfort and grief. What should have been joyful was laced with a haunting familiarity they couldn't understand. Some of the boys later admitted to having disturbing dreams. Visions of Joanna or Jacqueline telling them that death wasn't permanent and that anyone could return. Even John Robertson, whose beliefs had seemingly been confirmed, paid a high emotional price. As his conviction about reincarnation deepened, neighbors began to distance themselves. Customers abandoned his business, friends disappeared. And after repeatedly challenging doctrine during church discussions, the local parish asked him to stop attending Mass altogether. "I got what I prayed for," John told Dr. Stevenson in 1982, 3 years before his death. But I never realized that proof would be so terrifying to live with. For Dr. Stevenson, one of the case's most inexplicable aspects remained Jennifer's birthmarks. The fact that she and Jillian were monozygotic, genetically identical, made the presence of unique markings on only one twin medically impossible under conventional science. To investigate further, Stevenson consulted leading experts. Dr. Margaret Fitzgerald, a geneticist at Cambridge University, reviewed his notes and photographs. Her conclusion was stark. Given that these twins are monozygotic, sharing identical DNA, the presence of distinctive birthmarks on only one child is medically unexplainable, using our current understanding of human development. Even more astonishing was the behavior these marks elicited in Jennifer. The mark on her forehead didn't just mirror Jacqueline's old scar, it behaved the same way. It grew darker in cold weather. It sometimes caused her pain. As a toddler, Jennifer would touch it and say things like, "The mark remembers being hurt," as if the scar itself carried memory, not just tissue. Stevenson had documented 14 other cases like this. Children born with physical marks that matched the fatal wounds of people who had died before their birth. In each case, the marks weren't vague but medically specific, placed precisely where the injuries had been recorded. Some mirrored bullet holes, others matched knife wounds. The consistency was undeniable. If true, the implication was staggering. Not only could consciousness survive death, but it might carry with it the physical scars of past trauma reincarnation, not just of mind and soul, but of the body's injuries. And yet even Stevenson wrestled with what he had uncovered. Though he was known as the world's foremost authority on reincarnation research, his private journals published after his death in 2007 reveal a man torn between scientific skepticism and the weight of the evidence. "I cannot honestly say that I believe in reincarnation in the traditional sense," he wrote in 1979. "But I also cannot deny what I have documented." The Robertson twins, along with hundreds of other cases I have studied, present evidence that demands an explanation. If not reincarnation, then what? He explored alternative theories. Could telepathy account for the twins' knowledge? Could genetic memory explain the behaviors? Could suggestion from parents create such specific patterns? But each theory fell short. Telepathy didn't explain birthmarks. Genetic memory couldn't account for knowledge of private conversations. Parental suggestion failed to match the spontaneous emotional weight of the children's reactions. By the final years of his life, Dr. Stevenson had shifted focus not on proving reincarnation, but on documenting anomalous human experiences that challenged the scientific status quo. He viewed the Robertson case as a cornerstone of that work. "Science advances by acknowledging what we cannot yet explain," he wrote. "These children have shown us that there are aspects of human experience that our current paradigms cannot accommodate." Today, the Robertson twins case continues to influence research into consciousness and survival after death. The University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies, now led by Dr. Jim Tucker, carries on Stevenson's work. Advances in technology from DNA analysis to neurological imaging have opened new frontiers. Yet the fundamental mystery remains unchanged. Now, in their 60s, Gillian and Jennifer Robertson live private lives. They rarely speak about their childhood and have declined most interviews in recent decades. But in a rare 2010 statement to researchers, Gillian offered a quiet acknowledgement. "I don't remember saying or doing those things," she said. "But I trust my parents. I trust Dr. Stevenson. Something happened to me and my sister in those early years. I don't know what it was. But it was real enough to affect our entire family." Jennifer has remained more withdrawn. Friends say she's uncomfortable discussing the past. But some close to her have reported that she still has vivid dreams. Dreams of places she's never visited, people she never met, and a death she never lived. The Robertson case endures not because it provides easy answers, but because it forces us to ask better questions. It blends the physical with the psychological, the emotional with the inexplicable. It presents a mystery with roots in the human soul, daring us to look deeper. If children can carry memories of lives they never lived, if physical marks can appear on bodies without explanation, then perhaps we've only just begun to understand what it means to be human. And perhaps, just perhaps, death is not the end. Jennifer still lives with echoes of a past she can't remember. Friends say she suffers vivid dreams so unsettling that she sought counseling on more than one occasion. Dreams of places she's never been, of pain she's never felt, of deaths she never lived. The Robertson twins case raises questions far beyond the boundaries of science or faith. If consciousness can somehow survive death, if it can return in a new form, what does that mean for our understanding of personal identity, morality, and the very nature of existence? For centuries, philosophers and theologians have debated these ideas. But stories like Gillian and Jennifer's bring abstract speculation into sharp, painful focus. If the twins truly carried the consciousness of Joanna and Jacqueline, were they the same individuals reborn? Or new beings merely touched by remnants of a previous life? And what of trauma? If emotional and even physical wounds can persist beyond death, how do we redefine healing? Could some forms of unexplainable anxiety phobia or chronic pain be echoes from lives forgotten? These questions remain unanswered, but they can no longer be easily dismissed. Whatever the ultimate truth may be, one thing is clear: human consciousness is far more complex and perhaps far more enduring than we currently understand. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of the Robertson case isn't what it reveals about death, but what it whispers about love. If Joanna and Jacqueline somehow returned even for a brief moment, then maybe love doesn't die with the body. Maybe the bonds we form with family and those we lose reach across lifetimes. For a few precious years, Florence and John Robertson experienced what every grieving parent longs for: a sense that their children had come home, that love had brought them back, and that some mysteries exist not to terrify us, but to heal us. The memories faded by the girl's 5th birthday, just as Dr. Stevenson had predicted. It was as though the veil slowly dropped again. The borrowed consciousness receded, and 2 new souls were left to grow into their own futures. But those years left a mark not just on the Robertson family, but on anyone who has since encountered their story. This case reminds us that tragedy may not be the final word, that something waits on the other side of loss. Something unmeasured by science, but deeply known by the heart. What do you believe? Do you think everything in this case has been uncovered? Or are there still layers left to peel back? Were Gillian and Jennifer truly the reincarnation of their sisters? Or is there another explanation for what happened? Tell us in the comments, we read everyone. And if this story gave you chills or made you question what you thought you knew about reality, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who loves mysteries that walk the line between the known and the unimaginable. The truth might be stranger than we dare to believe. We'll see you in the next video, where another story waits, one that science still can't explain.